second Planning Committee meeting to be held at the KP Centre. My name is Councillor Pamela Fitzpatrick and I'm the Chair of the Planning Committee. Could I ask the other members to introduce themselves? Just start with Simon.
Yes, I'm Councillor Simon Brown.
Councillor Nitin Parekh, Vice Chair of Planning Committee.
Councillor Ajay Maru for Kenton West. Thank you.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, Headstone North Ward, and a full member of the Planning Committee.
Councillor Marilyn Ashton, Conservative spokesman on the committee.
Councillor Anjana Patel, full member of this planning committee. Thank you.
Thank you. This meeting will go by members' individual phones because the clocks are slightly inaccurate. Can I ask everybody to disconnect their Wi-Fi because it interferes with our IT? So if you could do that, please, if you've got your Wi-Fi on. There are toilets outside the double doors here. If you need to get up, please use your mask and please follow the signs as to which way to walk. This meeting is being audio recorded and will be available to watch or listen on the website. Are there any reserved members in attendance? Councillor Murray?
Reserving for Councillor Maxine Hanson. Thank you.
Thank you. Yogia? Wishes to backbench on the item 1. Yeah?
That's right, yes, Stanmore and Edgware Golf Club.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any other declarations of interest that need to be declared? Councillor Murray?
Thank you, Chair. Item 101. As I'm the Cabinet Assistant for Businesses, in that role I've been to meetings and have been advised of meetings, and that the applicant had council officers concerning the council's ambition to redevelop Woolstone, which might affect his business at the time. So to avoid any perception of conflict of interest or bias, I will leave the room when that item comes on the agenda, as well as item 204, when I was a mayor at applicant. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second one is a non-pecuniary?
Sorry, yes, that's a non-pecuniary.
Thank you.
My apologies for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Declarations of interest? No? Okay. Can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on 9th of June? Councillor Ashton?
Yes, thanks, Chair. There's a very minor mistake. Both Councillor AJ Maru and myself declared a non-pecuniary interest in the car park at the back of Bombay Central because it says on the minutes that we're ward councillors, but neither of us are ward councillors. So I'd like to propose that the minutes are amended. I think I said that I've occasionally spoken to the proprietor of the restaurant when I've eaten there, and Councillor Maru can say what he said, but I think it was more that he kind of knows him as a customer as well. So, similar thing.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that if that needs seconding.
Thank you, Chair. Just as Marilyn has said that we are not ward councillors. I'm Kenton West. So, yes, now and again, yes, that is a perfect dining place. Thank you.
Thank you. Subject to those amendments, they agreed? Agreed, thank you. We do have some public questions. I've been notified of 2. And the first is Mr. Mark Mulvenna. Would you like to come and ask your question? Do we have Mr. Mark Mulvenna? No? Do we have anybody online? No, we don't. Shall I just give the answer to the question?
Yes, you could either read the question and read the answer.
I don't have the question to hand, is my problem.
You could then send the answer in writing to him.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll send the answer in writing. Okay, and I've got a second public question from Mr. Mike Williams. Would you like to come?
Thank you.
And can I just check the timing? It's 2 minutes, I think, is it? 2 minutes, the public question?
15 in total, I believe.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my mistake. Go ahead,
I
please.
won't take 15, I promise.
Okay. Thank you.
Will the committee please agree that Harrow's future housing needs cannot be met by simply allowing developers to pursue short-term profit and building more and more small 1- and 2-bedroom units in high-rise developments with no outdoor space, and that Harrow's Planning Committee must use all means available to it to ensure we get the right mix of development, including low-level family housing with gardens?
Thank you. It's a very important question. For strategy policy, CS1, which indicates new residential development shall result in a mix of housing in terms of type, size and tenure across the borough and within neighbourhoods, to promote housing choice, meet local needs and to maintain mixed and sustainable communities. Policy DM24, housing mix of the development management local plan, specifically seeks larger dwellings in the affordable housing tenure, but in terms of market housing, advocates a more balanced and flexible approach that, whilst having regard to identified needs, seeks to match housing mix to the location and nature of allocated sites, or sites likely to become available. Such an approach is also reflected in the London Plan 2021. Each development proposal will be considered in this regard, noting that most development coming forward in Harrow is located within the Harrow and Wealdstone opportunity area, which is more urban in nature than the rest of the borough. Do you have a supplementary question to that?
I do. Although I'm encouraged by your answer, it missed out one really important facet of the controls which this committee has at its disposal. And following Councillor Henson's recent enthusiastic support of supplementary planning documents, particularly to restrict the development of tall structures in residential areas, and I have a list here, and as we've got the full 15 minutes, I could read you the list. It would take practically the whole 15 minutes to do that, of other local authorities who are using supplementary planning documents to restrict the development of tall structures in residential areas. And many of the outer London boroughs are doing that right now. Harrow is almost unique in not doing it. Will this committee please take urgent steps to bring forward a supplementary planning document to prevent the further development of tall structures across West Harrow, and that would include the Ridgeway and the Vaughan Road car park site?
Thank you. I don't have an answer for you now, I'm afraid, but I will provide a written answer to you.
The answer is yes, and you instruct the officers to draft an SPD.
Yeah, we will come back to you with an answer for that, but thank you for your question. A written answer we will provide you.
Okay, can I take that as positive, that you will actively consider a supplementary planning document to restrict tall structures?
Yeah, we can't give more than an answer. We will respond to you in writing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming along. Okay, petitions. We haven't received any petitions. Do members wish to present any petitions? No? Okay. No deputation requests have been received and no references have been received. So is the addendum and supplemental addendum accepted? Representations received in respect of planning applications 1, 2, 2, and 205. Can we accept to receive those representations? Agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Okay. So we shall move on to the first of these, which is Stanmore and Edgware Golf Centre. And we have Councillor Amit Joga, who was going to speak on that, but we'll have the officers first. Councillor, oh yes, please leave the room, Councillor. Thank you. If we could just wait till Councillor Marrow's left. No, please come to the back and forward. But... Thank you. If you'd like to go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening, members of the committee, members of the public. This is item 101, which relates to Stanmore and Edgware Golf Centre. Just to draw members' attention to the addendum for this item, which sets out an additional reason for refusal in relation to policy S5 of the London Plan. This relates to the failure to consider alternative sports provision on the application site. Further comments were sought from the GLA on this matter, who have confirmed that although this policy wasn't considered in their stage 1 response, it predated the now adopted London Plan, and if the application were to be recommended for grant, it would be required under stage 2 under an updated policy assessment. So just to outline red line site here, it relates to just the former golf club building, the area of hard standing and immediate soft landscape around the building. The application, the borough boundary runs down Brockley Hill to the east, with the London Borough of Barnet situated to the east of the site and Harrow on the western side. The entire site is designated Greenbelt. The Stanmore Country Park and Pearwood Conservation Area is located on the western side. There is an archaeological priority area which runs down the eastern part of the site and partially through the application site. So the proposal is for a part single-storey building to provide a banqueting facility together with a car park, as well as associated landscaping and alterations to the site access on Brockley Hill. The building has been subject to an extensive fire at the end of summer 2020, in which much of the building has now been destroyed and only the remaining frame of the building and hard standing is currently on site. In terms of consultation, we have undertaken 2 rounds of consultation, and to date we have received 612 objections. So here you can see the current building on site to the right, together with the former building on the left hand image. There are 3 main issues in terms of the principle of development. So that relates to impact on Greenbelt, development outside of the town centre, and provision of sports facilities. In terms of the first issue, Greenbelt, there is only one applicable criteria in the NPPF which is relevant to this case in terms of new buildings, and that is that the development needs to be on previously developed land, and it needs not to have a greater impact on the openness compared to the existing building on the site. So the diagram in the bottom left here, you can see the pink outline which shows the proposed building, which would be located on previously developed land. So it's accepted that even despite the fire damaged building, that the development would still be located on existing hard standing areas, and the fire hasn't altered that situation. The second requirement relates to impact on openness. So this requires a comparison between the existing and proposed site conditions. The applicant's assessment, however, is currently based on the pre-existing building form. And so for that reason, officers haven't been able to take into account an accurate assessment in relation to the fire damaged building and the proposed building. But nevertheless, based on the site observations, given that much of the external walls, the roof, are no longer present, in officers' opinion, the structure is now much reduced in the landscape, both in terms of its spatial and visual impact, and would have a much greater the application is supported by a landscape and visual impact assessment. Here you can see two images which show the development from outside, from longer distance vantage points. It's well screened by mature trees and vegetation, and it's accepted that the proposed development wouldn't be visible from these longer distance views, even taking into account the fire damaged building. However, in more localised views from within the site, the landscape and visual impact assessment does note that the former building was clearly visible and prominent from within the site. But again, the assessment is based on the pre-existing building form. And as you can see now, the current building on site does have a very different landscape character. So although the building would have a more compact form, nevertheless, given it would appear as a solid developed mass, in officers' view, it would have a much greater visual presence and impact on the openness of the green belt. In terms of the change of use of the land to be used as a banqueting facility, the NPPF does allow for change of use in the green belt, but that's subject to tests of not conflicting with the purposes of green belt and not impacting on openness. Although it was considered there was potential for some conflict with the purposes in terms of dealing with urban regeneration and urban recycling. To address that, the applicant has submitted a sequential assessment which considers a number of sites within Harrow, as well as the adjoining boroughs of Brent, Hertsmere and Barnet, and no alternative sites have been demonstrated. So in terms of the change of use element, that is accepted, but nevertheless, the issue of impact on greenbelt openness remains an issue. The applicant hasn't put forward a case of very special circumstances to justify a departure from the policy in this case. The banqueting facility, it would, in officers' view, have a very limited community value as a private business. It's not fundamental to the health and well-being of the community, and it doesn't fall within the definition of as a community facility within the local plan. And in terms of it's noted the land has been subject to extensive fly tipping, and the structure is somewhat of an eyesore in the landscape, but nevertheless, the state of the land doesn't provide justification for inappropriate development in the green belt. And just finally, turning to the final issue, in terms of the principle of development, which deals with loss of sports and community facilities, the applicant has undertaken an extensive assessment in relation to existing golf facilities in the surrounding area, and has shown that there is a wide range of other facilities. So there would be, whilst there would be no conflict with the local plan policy in that respect, as outlined on the addendum, there is an issue where the alternative sports provision on the site, which is now explicitly set out in the new adopted London plan, hasn't been addressed by the applicant. Just in terms of character and appearance, setting aside greenbelt issues, the building is generally considered to be acceptable in terms of its scale and massing, and the materials would be acceptable in terms of its greenbelt setting and rural location. The application is accompanied by a noise impact assessment, which considers the operational noise in relation to the banqueting facility, as well as people entering and exiting the venue, and conversation at the back of the site. That has been reviewed by the Council's Environmental Health Team, and they consider the report to be acceptable in that there would be no adverse impact, subject to conditions to ensure that the windows and doors on the banqueting facility remained closed, and also subject to an operational condition on hours of opening. Just turning to traffic and parking, the application has been reviewed by the Highways Authority. Overall, the Highways Authority consider that the highway network would be able to accommodate the number of vehicular trips associated with the development, but nevertheless they have concerns over the risk of overspill parking, both in respect of Harrow and Barnet residents. And overall there would be 62 visitor parking spaces and 16 overflow parking spaces, and that is considered to be insufficient for the larger scale events of capacity up to 500, which could occur on a regular monthly basis. Objections have been received also from Barnet Highways Authority, and the applicant has put forward a solution to provide an overflow parking scheme. However, officers don't accept the principle of that scheme because the location hasn't been identified, and it hasn't been shown that there would be an acceptable number of spaces in order to make the scheme work. The application has also been reviewed by the Council's Biodiversity Officer. It's considered to be overall deficient in terms of biodiversity net gain requirements, and it failed applications red line area and taking into account the wider ecological network. An archaeological assessment has also been submitted in relation to the archaeological priority area. This has been reviewed by the Greater London Archaeological Advisory Centre, and they have outlined that the proposal is deficient because a fieldwork evaluation must be undertaken due to the potential heritage assets of high importance that could be located on or around the application site. So in this respect, the proposal hasn't demonstrated that archaeological assets wouldn't be harmed. So currently the Planning Committee is asked to refuse this application for the reasons discussed, in terms of the proposal would fail to, the applicant has failed to address that the proposal wouldn't have a greater impact on greenbelt openness, the failure to provide adequate on-site car parking facilities, an inadequate archaeological evaluation, and biodiversity assessment, and it hasn't been demonstrated that there could be alternative sports provision to meet the borough's needs. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, one very fundamental question. I'm just a little curious as to why this is agenda item 101. It should be 301, shouldn't it? It's a refusal. It doesn't matter, but it's just a little odd. And actually, I know that you didn't call this in, Chairman, and I know I didn't. So the officers must have done. Bearing in mind the only real problem with this is a load of objectors, I'm rather surprised it's before the committee. You couldn't have refused it under delegated powers. We don't usually see refusals.
I took the view to bring this into committee because of the public interest that had been clearly displayed by over 600 objectors. So I took the decision to bring this to committee, which is within the scheme of delegation for me to be able to do.
Oh, of course. No. There's a number of reasons why it would be here, and I'm not going behind that. Of course, it's your prerogative. It's just that it's not as if the public opinion or public interest in this is at odds with the recommendation. That's all. I just make that point. I'm just a little curious. But otherwise, I've got no questions on a very good presentation, if I may say. Thank you.
Any other questions from members? No?
Chair, can I reserve my questions once the president, like we've got a councillor to give his views, and I assume is there an applicant coming here as well?
And then you can come afterwards. Yep,
Yes.
okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. As noted in the presentation, this application has been of tremendous concern to the residents of Cannons and Stanmore, as well as those of Edgware Ward and the London Borough of Barnet. I support the refusal as outlined in the report for the following reasons. The main concern amongst residents has been around parking and congestion. And I speak with my TARSAP hat on today that there is simply not enough parking for this development. 62 parking spaces, although there'll be 14 in the overflow, is not sufficient for large-scale events for up to 500, which, as outlined in the presentation, would be a regular occurrence. This would have a high knock-on effect spillover on the nearby Julius Caesar Way estate, which currently has no CPZ, and where overspill, which they're already experiencing from previously at events at Wembley, can barely cope. And the Brockley Hill Residents Association, which have been very active and vocal in their representations, will also not be able to cope with any overspill. There's also no safe access to the development should people park in these areas. There's no safe place to cross or to walk over from either Julius Caesar Way or the Brockley Hill estate. Members will also note there are strong objections from both Harrow and Barnet highways. And whilst travel plans are welcome, it's unnerving to know that no location has been specified, which adds to the point that these often simply don't work, particularly for such facilities. Access is also an issue. In the previous golf club that used to exist on this site, there was a steady flow throughout the day, whereas should it be an events banqueting centre, you'd see hundreds of people turning up at one point in time, which would cause serious congestion, which Brockley Hill won't be able to cope with. And we've just seen that last week when we've had the recent roadworks on London Road. And whilst the reduction of 30 miles per hour has been proposed, this would also lead to further congestion. As the report, just very briefly, as the report also said, this is a much loved green belt site which is very precious to the local community, and the application provides a lack of safeguarding of this site. It's also a site of significant interest of archaeological support, and again the report demonstrates the potential of how these assets could be protected. The area consists of sites of tremendous ecological spaces, with the ancient woodland of Hare Wood and the Stanmore Country Park. And again, there's a lack of sort of evidence in the report of how these areas would be protected, particularly amongst the noise that would have an impact on the wildlife as well as local residents. And finally, the golf club has been a huge loss to the local community, and the application has failed to demonstrate how this sporting amenity would be replaced. And so with that in mind, I would like to support the reasons for refusal. And I would like to end by echoing the points made by Councillor Ashton. It's been a contentious application, and it's been unnerving to see this application come to committee, given the huge level of opposition. We've had 612 objections in contrast to the 3 letters of support. So we're quite surprised to see this come to committee, given the objections, and I urge members that all the reasons for refusals are clearly noted, and that there's no subsequent way of this application in its current form making its way back to committee. And I urge members on both sides to support the refusals outlined in this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jogia. I'd like to bring Beverly back in just to pick up on the point that you've raised.
Because reflecting again on my initial response, one of the reasons I called it in is because officers have recommended refusal on certain bespoke reasons. In the event that the application is refused and a revised application is submitted, it would be difficult for the council to introduce additional reasons for refusal at that point. So on an issue that is very controversial, I'm minded to let members review the reasons and agree those reasons, or disagree those reasons if it will, say, well, don't refuse it on those grounds, but have you thought? And that's one of the reasons I brought this to committee, in the event that a revised application does come forward, that members are happy with the reasons that officers have provided in this instance.
Thank you, Beverly. Can I take any more questions? Councillor Perec, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few kind of clarifications from the officer about certain things. For example, there's heavy reliance on Lansbrook case in this particular application. And as I understand that applicant doesn't agree with our views of what we're interpreting on Lansbrook case on paragraph 145 and 146 of LPPF. How confident are we about our interpretation of the Lansbrook case, please?
So, in terms of the applicant's response in relation to the comments made that the development would be applicable in terms of paragraph 145D, in officer's opinion, paragraph 145D is not applicable, because that requires that the development is in the same use, which in this case it's not the case. The golf club would be fundamentally a different use operationally, with different operational impacts. So we're clear that wouldn't be applicable. In terms of paragraph 145G, that as set out, we do accept that it would be on previously developed land, but the issue then is with openness of the green belt, and in this case, as it's based on the pre-existing building form, it's really for the applicant to put forward a case that it's not going to have a greater impact, but as that hasn't been done, we can be clearly confident that it hasn't been demonstrated to us that it wouldn't have a greater impact.
And I understand that you're commenting on 6.2.45. It'll be 100% increase on the current volume in terms of the volume and floor. How confident are you on that interpretation in terms of because there is an existing structure there in terms of the frame and the hardcore footprint at the moment. So, because at the end of the day, I assume they are not agreeing with our interpretation on this particular aspect. Am I right?
So what we've set out in the report is that in terms of the spatial impact on the green belt, in terms of footprint, floor space and volume, that hasn't been demonstrated through a technical assessment to officers. But what we have said is just based on site observations that we consider it would have a greater impact just based on the site observations. But fundamentally, it is down to the applicant to provide that technical assessment to us to demonstrate that, and we can't be convinced based on the existing documents that's been provided.
Commenting on Councillor Jogia's one of the point that they have not given us location of park and ride alternative arrangement for parking. If I refer to the email we all received yesterday, there was some mention of a location. Can you highlight that, Mrs. Stu? Is it acceptable? You know, the email we received yesterday.
There's been formally no site has been put forward as part of this application. The applicant has set out in their legal opinion that only the principle of that needs to be acceptable. But in our view, we can't grant planning permission without knowing where the site location is definitely proposed and whether and how many parking spaces that would actually involve.
If I'm not wrong, I read the actual location as well in the email which we all received yesterday, very specific on where he can arrange alternative parking. And obviously there are a few reports which we are waiting. Can you let us know which are the reports we are still awaiting from them as per yesterday's email? Is it biodiversity report, archaeological report?
In terms of the reasons of biodiversity, it's not just the surveys. It's the surveys there in terms of biodiversity. It's really the applicant has outlined that it's a land ownership issue, but what we're saying is that it's really fundamentally the applicant hasn't looked beyond the red line to consider the indirect impacts on biodiversity. So it's not just about the surveys. And generally, we would only condition surveys in exceptional circumstances for biodiversity. It's generally something that needs to be provided up front with an application. Unless there are overriding reasons. In this case, we don't consider there to be any overriding reasons. The applicant did have ample opportunity to submit some of the surveys, but that wasn't done.
Questions, Councillor Barrett?
I've got a comment basically. I mean, I understand the 600 plus objections quite a lot, and if I'm one of the residents, I might be objecting as well. But at the same time, if you look at Harrow has lost 2 banqueting halls over the last maybe 4 to 5 years. And the one in Wilston was actually because council was developing the land for a new civic centre, and there was one in Edgware, which was used by everybody, all the communities, not just selected. So I feel it is a loss of facility to Harrow, as a banqueting hall. And I feel from the emails which we received yesterday from the applicants planning that there's still so many information which we can utilize in making our decisions. So I feel that I would want to have more information before I make my decision about whether granting permission or not granting permission. And based on that, I would like to propose a deferral for allowing applicant to give us more information, and then we can make decisions.
Okay. Councillor Ashton, we'll come back to that in a moment.
Well, thank you. It's kind of a questioning comment, if that's all right, Chair. First of all, just to, based on what Councillor Parrick has said, just to dissect some of the reasons for refusal a little bit. My take on, for example, reason 1 is that we're effectively saying that this is unacceptable in principle. And when we say something's unacceptable in principle, I'm only paraphrasing, what we really mean is that a lot of this is based on a rather interesting appeal decision, isn't it, that was done last year carries quite a bit of weight because it's a material consideration, because it was a higher authority that made that decision. And it was different, but there are some similarities here. So, unless of course I've completely misunderstood, and perhaps you could correct me, Nicola or Beverly, the way I read, for example, reason 1, is that the council find that this development is unacceptable. It doesn't really leave a door open. I mean, you know, it's pretty unequivocal that we do not believe that this development on this site, given what's there now, is acceptable in the Green Belt. And if I've misunderstood that, I'd like to be corrected, because I think it's important that we're very clear when we make a decision what we're actually looking at. Can I sort of get a little bit of direction on that? Just to perhaps help to Councillor Perrick, you know. Thank you.
The wording is quite specific on that, in that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that it won't have a greater impact on openness. The onus is on the applicant to demonstrate that. We don't have that information. Clearly, site circumstances are very different now as we're determining the application, and as legislation requires us to determine according to current site circumstances. They're very different now than they were before. We don't. So the wording is very, very specific, that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that it would not have a greater impact than the existing, the current development on the site. So I don't think it's as hard and fast as maybe you suggested there, but they haven't given us the information that will allow us to make that decision, so they failed to demonstrate.
Okay, fine. Well, that's helpful. And also, if you look at reason 2, again, if Councillor Perrick is right, again, you've left the door open slightly, haven't you? Because what you're saying is, although I don't know how anybody in their right mind would think that you could have 500 people up there with no real sort of parking provision. I mean, it will hell break loose. But anyway, again, what I think this is saying, if I'm not wrong, is that they just haven't told us where the park and ride will be. Or have I misunderstood that? Because the way I read it again was that it was because it's a planning officer, planning speak way of saying it's unacceptable to a certain extent, because they haven't actually come up with anything. And more to the point, not only have they not come up with anything, but we don't even know if they ever came up with anything that we'd accept it.
If I can come in on that as well. They have suggested that a site could be found and that the park and ride scheme in principle could be done. And in principle, maybe that could be, but we don't have, as Nicola set out in the presentation, we don't have the information before us as to where that site might be, the capacity of that site, how that site would operate, to give us confidence to go ahead and secure that through a legal agreement. Officers want to know where that site is, and we want to be able to discuss that in detail with the Highways Authority, hence the second reason for refusal.
So am I right in saying that all of the reasons for refusal are not, as what one would normally expect, a condemnation to a certain extent that this is not an acceptable development on this site in principle?
I think that's a fair reflection. Officers had undertaken extensive pre-application discussions. We referenced that in briefing, and we talked a lot through the scheme as it was being developed. We're confident on certain parts of it. The design, as Nicola pointed out, are acceptable, but there were still outstanding matters that were not resolved. So, yes, I think the answer to what you're saying is yes, I would agree with what you have just said. We have worked, but we haven't got there, and the applicant has not provided us with the information that we need to satisfy ourselves that this is the appropriate scheme for the site. Hence the wording, very, very specific wording on the reasons for refusal.
So, sorry, please forgive me. So if the committee agree to refuse this tonight, in a sense, it wouldn't be the end of the road for the applicant, because the applicant could come back and fill in the gaps.
Yes.
All right, well, I might come back a bit later, but I'll listen to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councillor Baxter?
Yeah, it was a comment, not a question, but it clearly the parking scheme isn't sufficient, but it just occurs to me that whether it's park and ride or minibuses, hundreds of people attending banqueting events, weddings, set-piece events, they're just, or most of them are just not going to take part in these schemes. They don't want to be dropped off as close to the site as possible. I mean, whether it's, charity events or fundraisers, people spending quite a lot of money to be at those events, dressed up in their finery, they're going to be clambering to get those parking spaces there, and the impact on residents in that area, both here and in Barnet, I think is going to be unacceptable.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Chair. Just to formally second Nitin's proposal to defer, just for the record.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Ashton?
I'm actually quite disappointed because I was rather hoping, particularly when I saw the addendum, I thought, well, things are looking up because of the additional reason, which actually it's very hard to know how that could be resolved in the event that, if this ever went to appeal, because it's quite explicit, isn't it, this new reason in the 2021 London plan, so that doesn't leave the door open. I think that's the only one that doesn't really, isn't it, of all of them.
Thank you. Councillor Patel?
Thank you, Chair. I personally feel that it definitely shouldn't be deferred. There are reasons here, and obviously there are good reasons, even though it does leave a little bit of a door open. There are good reasons to refuse this application, and I personally feel that this is not really a right place to put a banqueting hall, definitely not, because it is, as we say, and knowing how this banqueting hall is going to be used, not for fundraising and things like that. It is going to be used for weddings and receptions and whatever not, where people go, and it could be evening functions as well. And when people go there, they go in their very nice attire, and they definitely don't want to walk from wherever the car is going to be parked. And they're definitely not going to be dropped off and picked up. So for me, this is definitely not an appropriate place to have this banqueting hall, and I don't think it should be deferred. I think it should be refused, as the officers have stated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton?
I'm not so sure, with respect to my friend, Councillor and Anjana Patel, I'm not sure about that. I think given what we've been told about the reasons for refusal, other than the additional reason that they are resolvable, I would like the officers to actually drill down a bit more into this, because if we refuse it tonight with reasons that effectively leave an awful lot of things that could yet be negotiated, that would not be acceptable to well over 600 people at all, I don't think this committee will be helping anybody, and particularly the objectors, by actually agreeing to refuse it. Just because it's recommended for refusal doesn't make it that everything's fine. It's job done, because actually, if these reasons for refusal are equivocal and they're not, that they can be resolved with some more information, we might find ourselves looking at another planning application or an amended planning application further down the line. Refusing it tonight, as I say, it could be cathartic, and I'm sure we'd be ever so popular, but I'm not sure it really solves the problem. I think we've got a problem because of the way that the reasons are worded. And if I may say, without prejudice, because this will obviously, depending on what happens when we go to vote, come back to us. But if, and I did think this at the time and did raise it, to be fair, as Beverly knows, at our, oh, you weren't there, were you? At our, oh yes you were, at our briefing, you weren't there, no, you were there, sorry, can't remember anything. At the briefing, I did unpick the reasons a bit, because I was concerned about them not being definite enough. And sort of thinking to myself, if I were asked to write reasons for refusal on this, I would have worded it very differently. So actually, I think that it might be an idea not to actually do this, because I don't really think it helps. What it does is it gives enshrines in a planning history, frankly, an open door, and I don't think that helps. So I'm pretty satisfied. Maybe for a different reason than Councillor Perrick, but I still think that it might be a more sensible approach given what I've heard tonight. And I must say I'm quite upset about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Patel and then Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think I now understand it better as my colleague here has spoken and explained the things, because I was also looking at the refusals, and as I say, there are quite a lot of doors open for it. But now that I've heard what Councillor Ashton has just said, I will actually think about it, what I would like to do with this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say that I'm also open to the idea of deferring it, because I don't like the idea of residents going away thinking, you know, they've got this kind of hollow victory and then it's unpicked shortly afterwards. So I think deferral might be helpful in this case.
If I could let Beverly come in first of all, and I'll come back to you.
Just to say that if members are minded to defer and for us to go back and to see what information that we can get, can I ask members to think about the time frame for that? We have been in discussions with the applicants for many months, and we've requested this information over many months, and it has not been forthcoming on some of these matters. So I'm mindful to let's have it, if members are minded to defer, can we think of a time frame for that information to be brought back, say, to a September committee or an October committee to give the applicants a chance to do that, rather than let the process to continue to go on?
Councillor Perrick, and then I'll come back
Yes,
to you.
thank you for agreeing, at least in principle, not maybe different reasons, but I agree with what Marion is saying, because if we refuse it tonight, I'm pretty sure this is coming back to us in near future. And as agreed, that we, in terms of the time frame, I feel that looking at the email we got yesterday from the applicant's planner, basically, I have a feeling that we might get it sooner. But I would say if we give them 8 weeks time, maybe September planning meeting, that's my proposal. I don't know what other feels. So that way, we're not, again, deferring it in September but we would have given them enough time to sort of carry out the necessary missing information which we want. And that way, at least, we are avoiding further comeback on this. And so that way, at least, we are sure, we have killed the case, actually. No, sorry, that's not the right word, but at least we should resolve the issue.
Thank you, Councillor.
Just to make it clear to anyone watching this, this doesn't really kick the can down the road at all. And I don't think that it needs months and months. As Beverly has said, she's saying that they've asked for information all the way along and haven't had it yet. So I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to aim for that. There's 2 meetings in September, isn't there? One at the beginning of the month and one at the end, to make up for the fact that we don't have an August meeting. So I wouldn't want it to drag on too long. And, what I'm saying is that if this information can't be satisfactorily given to the officers, Obviously, it would make sense for the officers to write their reasons for refusal in a more positive manner, more affirmative, rather, manner, because then that would be a proper refusal.
Thank you. Any more?
I think I agree with Councillor Ashton. Maybe it's the first meeting in September, is it in the first week of September, I assume? So, yeah, so that's the one I was aiming at anyway, around 8 to 9 weeks' time. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I just want to ask, were we given any reason as to why the information hasn't been presented previously, if there has been some time gone by? No? Do we want to set an earlier date then than the 29th to get this information? Because it would be better than getting it on the day of the planning committee or the day before, wouldn't it? So
We need to build in time for the information to be consulted on and to go back out to the public. So the information will need to be with officers by the beginning of August to hit a September committee. So it basically we're deferring to get the information within a month to allow us to do a consultation and report back at the end of September.
Yeah.
Nikki, did you have a...
That's fine.
Chairman, I'm so sorry. So just for absolute clarification, this is not a get out of jail card for a very unpopular proposal. What this is that we have to, in my view, if we're going to refuse something, we have to refuse it. It's perfectly acceptable to refuse an application to say, we just don't know, we haven't had the information. But that's not really a terribly good idea. Not really, and I think everybody would agree that. I think it's much better to know the score, and then, if the officers are still not satisfied that these tests have been met, I don't see how they can be, because particularly with reason one, because of the fact that you're relying on the fact that there is not the footprint there that used to be because of the fire. I don't think that this makes it beneficial necessarily either way. Thank you.
Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to speak, but if I can have one quick...
I'm afraid you can't, no. I'm afraid you've had your time. Okay, I think we are moving towards a vote, and there seems to be some consensus.
What did you want
anyway.
to say? I'll say it. Sorry?
No, come on.
Okay,
That's
right.
by the back door, we don't have that.
Councillor Amit Jogia wants to know, I really honestly, come on, it's silly, that to make sure that the consultation is done properly and thoroughly. Because last time it went a bit wrong, actually. A lot of people didn't get notified, or one house got other people's mail and so on. So we need to make sure it's done correctly.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have every confidence that the consultation will be done absolutely correctly.
Well, it wasn't last time.
So we will move to a vote, and the vote that we're taking now is to defer a decision on this item until the early September meeting, but it is conditional on the information being provided by the applicant within the time frame that officers need, and that we think is August, but we will leave. Do we need to give a date now?
We will need it by the beginning of August.
Beginning
if
of
we are
August.
to consult and get to the end of September committee.
Okay. So the decision to defer and get information by early August. All of those in favour, if you could raise your hand. Okay. And that's unanimous that it will be deferred. Thank you. That's a surprising outcome, I think, from the start of that one. But anyway, okay. Yes, if somebody could ask Councillor Barrow to come back. Right, so if we move on to the next item, which is 201, 56 Lawn Road.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So 56 Lawn Road is located in Wealdstone. It is a semi-detached property located on a residential street, which is characterised by terraced and semi-detached premises. The proposal before committee this evening is to convert the existing dwelling house into 2 flats. There would be an installation of a ramp at the front and bin and cycle stores as part of the proposal. Just want to draw members' attention to page 103 and the planning history for this particular premises, where earlier this year we refused planning permission for a conversion of the property. There were two reasons for refusal. The first one being that that the side access would be insufficient to allow access down the side for cycles and refuse storage, and secondly that the proposal would have an unsatisfactory stacking arrangement. The application before the committee this evening has addressed the reasons for refusal. On the screen at the moment is showing the previous scheme, which showed the stacking of a bedroom above a kitchen, which was unsatisfactory, and the width of the side access was shown at 500mm. Before the committee this evening, the application has sought to address those issues. A site visit to the site has determined that the side access way to the property is indeed just shy of 1 metre wide at 0.97 metres, and that width is sufficient to ensure that bin and cycle storage could be brought up and down the side access way as needed. And secondly, on the plans at the moment, as you can see, in terms of like for like and stacking arrangements have been addressed accordingly. In total to this planning application, we've received 5 objections following the consultation that we carried out. The objections that were raised have been addressed on pages 104 and 105 of the committee report and within the officer's appraisal where material planning considerations have been raised. The flats meet the London Plan space standards overall in terms of sizing, and therefore officers are satisfied that the quality of accommodation is appropriate and in accordance with the development plan in this regard. The site, and I just draw your attention to the addendum which clarifies that the car or the development isn't car-free as such, rather following consultation with the Highways Authority, due to the location of the site and the capacity in the roads and the surrounding roads for additional car parking, there would be no requirement from the Highways Authority to ensure that this proposal would be resident permit restricted. Overall, there would be 4 cycle spaces. As you can see on the plan in front of you now, there would be 2 spaces for each of the flats located in the rear garden. The bin storage would be split between the flats, with a couple of the bins within the rear garden of the upper floor flat and the additional provision at the front, which is where other premises in the street scene keep their bins. Some of the objections that have been raised relate to the loss of the front garden wall, which you can see here on the photograph. However, as noted in the report, this isn't a conservation area or a listed building, and therefore the loss of the garden wall in and of itself isn't unlawful. It's unfortunate because clearly it's decorative, as you can see from the neighbouring wall there, but there's no provisions within planning law to protect the wall, and therefore there isn't a breach in that respect. Overall, the principle of converting the dwelling is acceptable. Character and appearance and residential amenity have been addressed in the report, and we've recommended for approval. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from members? No? Okay. This one, Bekim Haziri. Would you like to come speak?
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee and members of the public, good evening. I'd like to speak to the points included in the report by the caseworkers in relation to the proposed development, as well as some of the points which were omitted, specifically because the points were indeed submitted through the objections as referred to earlier by no less than 5 individual families in the area on the same road. So section 4.3 states the responses received are set out below. The responses don't make any mention about the noise that's created by the use of the gate in the side access. This is pretty terrible vibrating noise that is extremely loud and very impacting to number 54. It doesn't mention that the alleyway is not wide enough for bikes and bins. Even if it's only 3 centimeters less than usually accepted, it shouldn't be accepted if it's less than that, 1 meter minimum. And in certain places, it's as little as 81 centimeters, owing to the installment of down pipes by the proposed developer. There's nothing to say that the shortfall is not significant. 97 centimeters is not the minimum required, and it's not wide enough, therefore, for bins and bicycles. And the number 94's wall is prone to be damaged by these bicycles as they pass through because the gap is not wide enough. It mentions security risk, but there's no further detail in the document about this. If the flat's residents are using the alleyway as a throughfare every day, several times per day, the gate will not necessarily be kept locked. It's there to protect 5 other houses as well as number 56. And in fact, 2 years ago, we had the last incident where police found an intruder in the shed of number 54. It also mentions no noise disturbance in relation to number 58, which shares the other side of the semi-detached. But there's no further detail in this document about this. The fact that the living rooms and the kitchen in the proposed plan will be sharing the same wall with number 58, where the adjacent rooms are bedrooms, will massively impact the quality of life and standard for number 58. There are families with young children and elderly parents, grandparents living there and using it as per the original design, whereby the bedrooms are upstairs. And obviously, the need to go to bed early to get to school and various other reasons will mean that they will be massively impacted by the noise from the lounge next to them. Section 6.3.3 states that since the wall has no statutory listings, it's therefore deemed acceptable to have it demolished. It fails to mention that the demolition of the wall has left the remaining part of the wall at number 58 on the frontage broken and unable to be the same again. The period materials that make up the wall mean it can only be truly made good through the repairs using the same original materials and brick. The state of the wall that is left now has affected both the character and indeed the value of the property at number 58. In fact, the property was on the market a few months ago and there were several comments made about the wall from prospective buyers. I have no doubts that the same Victorian style wall which runs along the other properties will have the same impact. Worst of all, this was done without any prior warning or consultation and still without any attempts to discuss any remediation to date. I also want to add to this point that regardless of the planning permission being under review, the work has been ongoing and is still ongoing.
I am sorry
and this can be
to
seen.
interrupt. That's your time up now. Thank you for coming along to speak to us. We'll take on board the points that you've made.
Okay.
Thank you.
The photos, the work's still ongoing. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a limited amount of time.
Okay.
Apologies, sorry.
Thank you.
We do have somebody, the agent for the applicant as well, Munir Ahmed. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. Yes, thank you. Good evening, members of the Planning Committee. In terms of the application, firstly, thank you very much for the officers for a very detailed report. The application that is in front of you is submitted to your work under the Council's previous reasons for refusal, which relate to access for refuse and cycle storage and stacking rooms, one of the stacking rooms for one of the ground floor flats, as the case officer has explained. The application is considered acceptable in principle, and there are no policies against the conversion of dwellings to flats, and the proposed flats would provide an increase in the smaller housing within the borough, thereby complying with the current objectives of the POPCORE strategy and the London plan. In relation to the Victorian wall in the front of the property, as the case officer has explained, it has no statutory listing, and therefore its demolition has no breached any planning rules. However, in order to ensure that there is an enhanced frontage, a landscaping scheme is proposed, which has been conditioned as part of the recommendation for approval to ensure that there is an acceptable level of landscaping together with a suitable replacement of boundary wall to be reinstated, and the applicant is very happy with that. The development is not considered to give rise to any increase in disturbance or other impacts compared to the existing situation. The applicant has a right of way over the site access. The gate on the side access is the standard wrought iron gate that you would expect on any other side accesses. And you can imagine that it's not a massive gate because of the width of the access is just about 1 meter. So it's not one that causes a lot of noise or disturbance. If anything, it may need to be oiled. That's probably about it. In terms of any noise and disturbance on the other parts of the semi-detached property, obviously the flat conversion will be subject to building regulations, stringent requirements for noise insulation, and conversion of a property into 2 units is, I have to say, is a pretty standard conversion in terms of planning. So we would cover all of the requirements under building regulations. In terms of the side access is considered suitable both from a technical perspective and a practical perspective. The width of the actual cycle or the bins are nowhere near to 1 meter or below. It's well below that, and it's suitable in terms of what the use it currently has and what the use is currently proposed for cycle and storage. The dwellings will meet the London Plan standards and have adequate facilities. And the site itself is close to public transport. The street is controlled, and the highways officer is satisfied in terms of parking and highways grounds. So thank you very much for having taken any questions.
Thank you, that was well timed, thank you. Okay, do we have any questions from members? I'm afraid that members in the public can't.
The gentleman said that the gate doesn't make any noise, and I live in number 54.
I'm sorry, we can't take those. I'm sorry, it's only people who have... I'm sorry, no, we can't. I'm sorry, we cannot hear from members of the public who have not registered to come and speak.
I asked to register.
I'm sorry.
There was only one person.
I'm sorry, we can't. We can't, I'm afraid. We have to move on. So members, are there any questions from members? Marilyn?
Well, I've got a comment to make, if that's all right, Chair. I must admit I'm very concerned about this, and I actually think it's about time we started to listen to people a bit better when they say that they're concerned about things. My experience of local residents, and particularly the good gentleman who's turned up here tonight, and the other gentleman who's obviously very upset because he knows different to what we've been told, and it's understandable that somebody who hears something that he knows because he lives an experience that is different to the information that the committee is being given, it's understandable that he's going to be unhappy because he knows different, because that's where he lives. And I'm sorry, Chairman, but I don't find that this is at all acceptable. I think it's regrettable that the reasons for refusal were reasonably narrow in context before, and I'm afraid we are where we are with that. But having said that, I think that the committee would be at liberty, if it wanted to be, to say absolutely not, we don't agree with this development. And the reason why is because there are going to be 8 people living in this house. And given the site-specific problems in this area and in this house, I can see very, very clearly that this will have a really terrible effect on these good people who live in Wealdstone Ward, who are represented by councillors who even when they're asked a perfectly reasonable question at Cabinet, and I'm referring to Councillor Proctor here, say,
Marilyn,
well, I'm
that's
going to
not
say what I want, and don't try and throw me out, because you tried to throw her out last time.
It's
I
not
will say what I want to say, and you can't stop me, and I'm going to carry on. So,
Say
even
what you want relevant to this committee.
I will say what I want to say, and you can't stop me. Just try it, okay? So what I'm going to say is this, that when Councillor Proctor gave an answer at Cabinet, she said
sorry,
that
Marilyn, this
nobody.
is inappropriate.
She said that nobody.
Marilyn, this
you
is
can interrupt me
inappropriate.
as much as you like, but I'm going to finish.
We will move on. If
No,
all
we will
you're
not.
going to do is
No,
make
we will not
political
move
points.
on, and we can argue all night.
We'll
but
move on if
I'm
you're just... Marilyn,
I'm
we
going
will
to
move
finish.
on.
She actually said
Marilyn.
that nobody ever goes to Wealdstone. Well, I actually took the trouble to go to Wealdstone.
Marilyn.
And I actually had a look at this property from the outside, and I can't see how this property can be converted into 2 flats for 8 people. I think it's completely unacceptable, and I think it's about time that this committee started to take a little bit more notice of the good people who live in Harrow, who pay an extortionate council tax and deserve to be listened to. Start speaking. There we are. I'm going to be proposing refusal, which I'm sure you'll be absolutely delighted to hear. And if you interrupt me again, there really will be a problem. It says...
Marilyn, it is inappropriate to make political comments about other councillors at this. Focus on the planning issues. I'm sure that that's what people want to hear.
Yes, and I'm sure the people in Wealdstone will be very interested to know that they're... And I'm going to be proposing refusal. The reason for refusal is as follows. The proposal represents an over-intensive use of the site and will result in a loss of residential amenity to the neighbouring occupiers by reason of the proposed conversion of this single-family dwelling house into 2 flats for 8 occupiers, contrary to policies CS1, Harrow Core Strategy 2012, D1 of the London Plan 2021, and DM1 of Harrow Development Management Policies Local 2013. It's very annoying when the microphone goes off because people watching this can't hear us. And I do hope that members of the Planning Committee listen to the people in Wealdstone, because I don't think that people complain for no reason, and they certainly don't object for their health. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I feel sorry for the which is going to be developed, because it's supposed to be family houses and not to be in having so many people living in a property, and that also have to share the pathway. My worry and my concern about this application is that it is fine for us in planning committee, it's fine for officers to actually propose grant, but when it comes to problems later on, because it is a shared access, there are always problems that occurs afterwards. At that time, when these very people come and complain about it, people do not listen to them, and at that time they will be told it is a civil matter. So where do they stand? So actually, as far as I'm concerned, this is not appropriate for this particular development to happen in the place where it is happening. And I actually second what my colleague has just proposed, and we should refuse this application. As I said, it is where we said that officers are actually encouraging applications like this to happen in a nice residential streets and nice residential houses. And then it becomes a civil matter. And I know many cases where enforcement don't want to do anything because it is a civil matter. So I feel sorry for the residents of Wealdstone. And Councillor is right that a councillor should be here to actually represent their ward properly.
Yeah, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat what's been said, but I do have a lot of sympathy with the residents in this area, in particular the neighbouring occupiers that share the alleyway, and I agree that this is over-intensive.
Thank you. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, as everyone knows, I agree with Marilyn in that I am not a fan of conversion of family houses into flats. But when we look at the regulations and the law and the appeals judgments, we know that we can't actually stop this type of conversion. We no longer have the ability to say we can only have 15% of houses down a particular street converted into flats. That was taken away from us. So we have very little control. I've been on the planning committee and seen refusals of things such as this immediately overturned on appeal with costs against the council. So I'm very sympathetic, but our hands are tied. Yes, we could refuse, it will go to appeal and the appeal will be granted. There's nothing, given that the previous refusal has been, and the reasons for it, have been addressed by the applicant. So I'm very much in the position of not liking what we're forced to do, but our hands are tied. There is no doubt about that. I'm very sorry that perhaps government could look at this and say, we want to protect our family housing stock and put some regulations in place to give us some power to do this. But at the moment, we haven't got that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarity, Councillor Brown. Would anybody else like to speak? Councillor Maru? Well, I'll take people who haven't spoken first. So, Councillor Maru?
Thank you, Chair. Pretty much echo what's been said by Councillor Brown with a heavy heart in hand. But if I may just get some clarifications, please, from Ola, for the objectors' points of the objections by Mr. Haziri. Are we able to clarify some of these points that have been raised here this evening, please? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Murray. So, in terms of, I made a list as we were going through. So, in terms of the width of the side access way, I believe we have addressed that in the report. 3 centimetres shy of 1 metre is not considered to be enough to say that it would be not wide enough. Issues to do with, damage to a wall belonging to another property is outside of the remit of the planning legislation. It's not something that we can intervene in any fashion, regardless of whether or not there's a planning application before the committee or not. In terms of security, that is addressed in the report with regards to a secure by design condition, which is a pretty standard condition for such applications, which requires the applicant to liaise with the Metropolitan Police to ensure that the proposal is certified in relation to security, and that covers a range of matters, including windows and doors and locks and lighting, for example. In terms of the gate and the noise issue, as the gate is there already, there was obviously already an issue with noise, and that in and of itself falls outside of the scope of this application, in my view. The existing property is a single-family dwelling house, that's noted, but it's a fairly large single-family dwelling house with a number of bedrooms. It has been extended significantly with a loft extension and a single-storey rear extension, so it could quite reasonably accommodate quite a large number of people anyway, regardless of the fact that the proposal is for 2 flats. Party wall matters in terms of insulation, which was addressed by the applicant's response to the objector, is correct. It falls outside the scope of us as a planning authority to intervene in that. There are other legislative requirements on the applicant to ensure that they meet the requirements of sound insulation, for example. And the front wall not being made good is a civil matter. It is something between the neighbours that they do need to address. It's damage. It is something that we don't legislate for in the planning remit, and it would be something that I would say that the applicant and the neighbour need to be able to address themselves.
Thank you, Ola. Just moving on, if these goes for grant, is there any possibility or possibilities where certain clauses are enclosed for approval?
Sorry, could you repeat that for me? Sorry.
Sure, yeah. What I was asking is, if it goes for approval, as it's been said for, is it possible to address some of these concerns or issues in a clause, or kind of a clause to for approval, pending to conditions? Yeah.
So planning conditions?
Yes.
Well, certainly the issues to do that are within the remit of planning and are covered by planning legislation, yes. So that, hence the reason why, for example, we've put condition 3 regarding secured by design to address the issues or the concerns around security risk. Issues to do with noise of a gate that already exists on the site and is already causing that issue isn't something that I believe we can actually legislate against in a condition. And one of the tenets of planning law is that we shouldn't be replicating other areas of legislation. In any case, that's planning law. So if something is covered by another legislative regime, such as building control or environmental health, then it would be dealt with by those regimes and not the planning laws themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton?
Yes, I know a little bit about the evolution of the policies on conversions. I can remember very clearly during 2002 and 2006 when we adopted the new unitary development plan, which was the father, as it were, of the local development plan. It was a very, very different type of document. And the one that we were working off, which was quite outdated, did have a very sensible limit to how many conversions we could put in one road. Unfortunately, and I was outvoted on this, and this is why I'm afraid I didn't call this one in, by the way, which makes a change, but this is why I tend to call all of these in, because I really think they absolutely destroy neighbourhoods and the idea and the concept of family dwellings and so on. And I'm afraid we were very, very much outvoted. When I say we, I mean the Conservatives, because we were in opposition then. We had a Labour council, as it so happens, and they took away the limit, I'm talking about the Labour council, of the number of, the restriction on the percentage of conversions that you could have. It was policy H9, I remember it very clearly. And unfortunately, that sort of repeated itself when we then had to ditch the unitary development plan, which was, I think, Tony Blair's brilliant idea, and cost us a fortune, and had to adopt the local development framework, which took its place. And by then, of course, we had to have conformity with the original London plan, and in those days we had Ken Livingstone, the genius who wanted.
Yeah, if you could make your point, Marilyn.
I'll make it when I feel like it, Chairman, because you're not going to keep interrupting me. I wanted just to make my microphone work. Thank you very much. But I know that Ken Livingstone had some funny ideas, particularly on the Dan Doris site, putting a 50-storey high tower block there, but never mind. Well, what he did like were conversions, you see. So when we adopted our new policy, we had to conform with the London plan, and then it became very apparent that we were positively encouraging these things. And that is a legacy that we now have a problem with. And Councillor Brown is right. It is a challenge. I agree with Councillor Brown. It is a challenge. It's not a matter for the government. It's local policy we're talking about. It's our own policies. And you can't keep blaming the government for our mistakes in the past and what we now don't do correctly here. But anyway, it is what it is, and I am pretty confident, although I did say when I first started to speak that it is regrettable that the original reasons for refusal weren't a little bit more overarching. But nonetheless, it is pretty clear that in all respects, the side entrance, the noise and disturbance, the parking, in every way, this is going to materially and adversely affect the amenity of the neighbours. That is why they've turned up here tonight, and that is why they're upset. And me and my colleagues on this side are listening to them, and that is why I propose refusal. I think it's a sustainable argument. I mean, you can disagree, but please don't blame the government for this. If anyone's to blame for the fact that this is difficult now, it's this council run by the Labour Party. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. I suggest we think about putting in a joint statement, a cross-party statement to government complaining about the planning laws that restrict us, as Councillor Brown has outlined. But shall we move on to deal with the planning issues
Why don't you go and
today?
stand outside Bob Blackman's office?
Here for. So, okay, we have any more questions on that? Shall we move to the vote? Yeah, okay. So those in favour of approval of the planning? Oh, sorry, okay. Yes, you've distracted me, Marilyn.
Chairman,
Those in
I've
favour
proposed
of the
refusal.
motion to...
I seconded the refusal, so you take that first.
So those in favour of the motion to refuse, if you could first raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. Those in favour of the proposal to... Okay, and those against? Thank you. So that is carried. The decision is that approval for planning is granted. And I certainly will take up the suggestion of complaining about planning laws, I think.
No, you need to look at your own record as a party.
Item. I don't know if people are in need of a comfort break now, or should we move on because we've still got some objectors. It'd be nice.
I would love a comfort break, Chairman. The excitement is killing me here, if you don't mind. I'd love a comfort break, thank you.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. We do, if we could be quick, because we've got people waiting as well. Okay, Councillor Murray, can you come back? Thank you. So we are moving on now to Blythewood Road. Is that you, Beverly, talking to Blythewood?
Yes, Chair, that is me. The application is in relation to a 2-storey detached house on the eastern side of the road in in an area of similar properties. The proposal before you is for extensions to that property to convert the existing garage and for a a two-storey side extension on the footprint of the existing garage, infilling the porch and a rear dormer. The proposal is in relation just to increasing the size of the existing dwelling house. Those are the street views before you. The areas shown in red show the area of the side extension. So this is the existing garage, as you'll see, which is consistent. This is effectively a first floor extension shown there, and extensions to the roof to incorporate a new rear. I'll raise my voice. The application has been considered in the light of the supplementary planning documents and guidance and is considered to be acceptable in its appearance and in terms of its impact on the amenity of neighbours, and is recommended for approval. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have An objector? Yep. Alexander Osborne, do you want to come to the microphone? Thank you, welcome.
Hi. Evening, everyone. My name's Alex Osborne and I represent Mr and Mrs Pearce at 46 Blythewood Road, who are obviously the neighbours to the property. I'm a chartered environmentalist and environmental consultant, just as a bit of background. Obviously, you've seen our objection letter and we're disappointed with your intention to approve the extension plans at number 44. Our concerns still remain and are as follows. We feel that by allowing building to the boundary on 2 stories, you are encouraging development of properties very close to each other, which is out of character with the existing suburban setting of this area. The London Borough of Harrow contains a wide variety of housing types and residential settings, and whilst we appreciate that Harrow's design guide has to cover all of these, there should be consideration given to each setting. Development guidelines that may be suitable for central Harrow and other densely built areas within the borough should not necessarily be applied to more sparsely developed tree-lined avenues such as Blythewood Road. In relation to our concerns regarding the foundations of the proposed extension, during conversations with the Harrow Planning Department regarding this application, we were informed that due to the current pandemic, site visits weren't being made. We would like assurance that if you were to grant these proposals, the building regulations team will be visiting the site during the construction and ensuring that any existing or new footings for the extension are suitable and that there will be no risk to number 46. You will note from our objection letter that one of our major concerns was flooding at the site. The site is within a critical drainage area and is within surface water flood zone 3A and 3B. The planning committee document that was provided for this meeting refers to the submission of a flood risk assessment as part of the application. This was not made publicly available and we would welcome the opportunity to review this. As set out in 46 Blythewood Road's objection letter, the family have resided at the address since the houses were built in 1956. In times of heavy rain, significant flooding has occurred at the front of the properties at number 42 and 46, and to some extent at the front of 42 and 44, and to some extent 46. And this is only likely to increase in both severity and frequency as a result of climate change. In 2016, the flooding was so severe that it encroached into the property of number 42, and the residents were forced to undertake significant remediation works and actually moved out of the house for a year whilst these works were undertaken. Historically, and I'm talking all the way back to when the houses were built in 1956, the flooding to the front of number 44 has been alleviated by opening the front garage door and the rear garage door, allowing the floodwaters to pass into the garden where they can disperse. The introduction of a solid structure at this point will mean that the waters have nowhere to go, and the risk of flooding at all of the properties on this section of road will be increased significantly. Whilst the planning committee document includes advice on the provision of a sustainable drainage system.
Thank you. I'm really sorry to interrupt, but that's your time. But thank you very much for coming.
Can I just urge you to condition SUDS as opposed to just have it as an informative, and that they should allow for a 20% overcapacity in
I am sorry, I have to stop you. The time's up. I'm sorry. But thank you very much for coming along. Okay, and we have the applicant, Dipesh Shah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dipesh Shah. We're the agents for the applicant. As the presentation suggested, that this extensions and alterations is within the existing footprint of the dwelling. So just to pick up on some of the comments that the objectors have raised, the foundations issue obviously is not a planning concern, and yes, it will be properly met with party wall surveyors as well as building control, who will look after the construction of the foundations. The two-storey extension along this street, there have been several other site extensions been accepted and approved by Harrow, so I don't see that as a major result, a reason for refusal of this application. The main issue which the objectors have raised as well is to do with the flooding issues. Now, this is obviously a natural occurrence that occurs at this property and affects the adjacent properties. The conversion of the garage, in terms of providing a solid state at the front, and the fact that the current applicant does allow for the water flow to go through the garage and sort of run into the back of the garden, possibly causing more problems down the road at the back of the garden, is not a planning consideration. We did submit a flood risk report, and even in that report it did state that in the event of a 1 in 100 rainfall, that the potential of the flooding could exceed 300 mil above the finished floor level. So whatever we do with this part of this conversion, we won't be able to stop this water flooding the local properties. I think that's all I would like to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming this evening. Okay, can I take any questions? Councillor Parekh.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Picking up on the points made by the objector on the certs, just want to ask the officer about, I probably know the answer, but can we not put it as a condition because, or maybe put some permeable flooring in the front garden so to allow the water to go through the floor?
I think when officers considered the application in the light of the flood zones, etc., we look at what's on site at the moment. The application is not increasing the footprint on site. I do understand that currently there's a garage there that you can open, someone chooses to open the door and let the floodwaters through. However, the conversion of that garage into a habitable room and the building of a frontage does not in itself require planning permission. That is a material part of our considerations. So from an officer's perspective, the applicant has gone as far as we think is reasonable, and to impose further restrictions on that in the light of potential without the need for planning permission, I would suggest the informative would suffice, and it would be unreasonable to impose a condition. We would not refuse planning permission in the absence of SODS, given the background of the situation. Therefore, it would not be right to put a condition on it.
In terms of, I probably know, in terms of the front garden, I think at the moment it's crazy paving or maybe stone, brick. Can you not ask them to remove some of the surface? And you can't.
It's outside the remit of this application. I'll also pick up on the building regulations and the comments made, if I may, in terms of planning officers not attending site. What we had done during the pandemic was secure photos or videos of the site. Building control officers, however, whose role is to manage the safety of buildings in their construction, have, subject to risk assessments, maintain site visits throughout. Should Harrow Building Control be given this work, as you know we're in a competitive environment, those foundations works would be inspected.
Thank you. Marilyn?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As you probably guessed, since it says nominated member called this in, and since you didn't, it was me, I called this in to the committee. I completely understand why the objectors are upset about this. And I'm a little bit perturbed to hear that in order to make this a more satisfactory issue for them and to give them some reassurance, I'm not quite sure why we can't put a condition on it if it satisfies that requirement to make sure that everything that is humanly possible is done. That everything that is humanly possible is done to mitigate as much as possible the potential for flooding, because if the remedy for the flooding was to open the front of the garage door and let the water drain through, and you're right, absolutely, it's being converted, there's nothing we can do, it can happen just like that, you don't need planning permission to do that. But so that's not the issue. The issue is just a practical issue that, you know, that can't happen anymore. Ergo, you know what water's like, it just finds a way. So isn't there anything that we can do to reassure the objectors that we're taking this flooding issue a bit more seriously, rather than just putting an informative on? Couldn't we put a condition on it? I know, I read that. Sorry. So that's why I'm asking.
I'm happy to take legal advice on it. The tests, as you will know, for conditions require 6 tests to be met. In effect, the condition has to, you would attach a condition where otherwise you would have to refuse planning permission. I'm summarising. As you'll, to meet the 6 tests for conditions, that is the nub of it. I will take legal advice. My personal view, from a planner's perspective, is it would be unreasonable. The informative is there. The applicant is in the room to hear what has been said, and I would hope would take that on board.
Councillor, if I may come in there. Yes, so the condition should only be imposed if it is necessary or it has been necessitated by this development. And from what I hear, the proposed development is on the footprint of the garage, and the development itself doesn't necessitate any flood-reducing measures or the SUDs. So therefore, it would be not justifiable to impose such a condition.
Oh, well, yeah, because it's just that when I read the report, I got a different impression, but okay, so I'm confused. Look, I'm not happy about that, but I'm pretty sure that if we put it to the vote, it would not be carried anyway. So I'm not going to try and do that. This does comply with our supplementary planning document. These extensions are acceptable in terms of what we allow on detached properties. This is not in the green belt, and it's not in a conservation area. Otherwise, it would be a completely different situation, but it isn't. And as I say, I called it in because I want to try and be helpful to people when they're anxious and concerned. But I'm afraid, and most people who know me will tell you that I can usually find something wrong with most things. But I have to say, I can't find a sustainable planning reason to refuse this. I understand the problem, and I am sorry that we can't put a condition on. Isn't it going to work? Yes. It's working again, about the flooding, because I can see that is a potential practical problem. You know, I mean, I bow to the better expertise of our legal advisor. I'm used to doing that in another, in court, so, you know, one doesn't go behind legal advice in that respect. But I'm disappointed. But I'm afraid I can't find a planning reason to refuse this. It does comply with our policies. I'm not happy about it, but I'm afraid there isn't anything that this committee can do. But I'm pleased that we were able to get it to the committee and at least review it. And I hope that helps a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions? No? Okay, shall we move to the vote on this then? So those in favour of approval? Any abstentions?
Yes, I'd like to abstain because, you know, I'm disappointed that we can't put the condition on.
Just one abstention?
I'm also abstaining.
As well.
All three abstentions, okay. So the decision is to approve. Okay. Oh, actually, would members mind? We have Westhouse Gallery and we have some speakers, some objectors, so could we move that up so that you don't have to wait? Would people be happy to do that?
We usually do that.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on to Westhouse Gallery. We'll come back to that. Just yeah, we'll do Westhouse Gallery. What I haven't got an objector for that. Westhouse. Okay, yeah.
Good evening, councillors. So the site that we are looking at with this proposal is within the Pinner Memorial Gardens. You can see the map on the bottom right shows the full extent of the park, but the specific site relates to the West House and the area directly in front of it, which is shown in the upper left. It is important to note that there are a couple of constraints on here. One is that West House is a locally listed building. The park is a locally listed garden. And the park also forms a designated open space and a site of importance of nature conservation. The proposal is to provide an extension to the terrace to the cafe which operates out of West House. West House itself is shown in the photo to the top left here. The existing terrace is shown here in situ. So the infill area would be between the existing terrace and the pavement area that can be seen here, which is a pathway which leads down to the pond. Also, as part of the proposal, it was proposed to remove the existing paving and replace it. One of the major concerns that was raised over the course of the application was the impact of the existing paving on the swamp cypress, which can be seen in the photos here. And so the officers, both the planning officers, but also the tree officer, biodiversity officer, and landscaping officer were all in favor of removing that paving and looking for a more suitable solution. In the interim, the applicant had removed the existing paving and has put in a temporary graveling surface here. After some extensive discussions with all of our consultees, our internal consultees, including the tree officer, it was decided that a form of graveled surfacing would be the best option to ensure that the condition of the tree can be not further impacted and possibly improved. However, we would be seeking further details to ensure that the way in which that gravel is implemented can be more tightly controlled this time and we can achieve a better outcome. In addition, there are some railings which will be along this side of the terrace and this side here. And these would be low-level, half-meter high railings, which would look something like this. Pardon me, I should have addressed the principle. Although the area is a designated open space, and in general, there are restrictions on development within designated open space, DM 18 does set out criteria by which such development can be acceptable, and we feel that this proposal would meet that criteria, and so the principle is acceptable. In addition, we think that it will result in a better result for the swamp cypress tree. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have an objector. Jackie, would you like to come to the microphone? Thank you. It's fine. It's fine. There's not many left now. I know the feeling, don't worry. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. My name's Jackie Lindop. I'm passionate about parks, not just Pinner Memorial Park, and I'm a volunteer. Well, I better stop because I won't be able to read this in time. Otherwise, sorry. This is about why the open space designation of a small piece of land in a not so large park must be fully protected by Harrow Council's policy to protect land which has open space designation from further cafe development. Having a vibrant cafe at Westhouse is appropriate. This is not an objection to the cafe activity which has spread extensively within Westhouse and also outside with a low brick wall attached to Westhouse. That has all been done within the building line of Westhouse. The application being considered now is an extension of cafe activity on parkland which has open space designation. This is the core issue and why the application should be rejected. In 2016, retrospective permission was given to the area of Cafe Terrace, which had already been established without planning permission around the swamp cypress tree. That cafe activity over these last few years has interfered with the parkland experience for all park users other than cafe customers. Well, I did have a different view of what it meant. For 70 years, residents living south and west of Pinner have benefited from a very enjoyable route to and from Pinner Village, which includes walking across the land in front of Westhouse, from which there's a truly lovely view of the lake and park and beyond. This part of the route connects park users to the wide main pathway which links West End Lane to the centre of Pinner. There is meant to be a thoroughfare for all park users between the indoor cafe and the recently established outdoor cafe Terrace. However, this has proved to be difficult to manage and maybe can't properly be managed. Moreover, cafe activity already blocks visual access to the best view across the park, one of, if not the best view in Pinner, and dominates the area around the lake and spoils the view towards Westhouse. It is clear that an extension of the existing Cafe Terrace would exacerbate negative effects for park users, and I fear the answers would be sought by further spoilage of parkland with open space designation. The land is there to serve the public needs, to visit a natural, open environment. The cafe activity is only okay insofar as it does not interfere with the park's principal purpose. I'd like to talk more about parks and how magical they are when they're allowed to be magical, and this has damaged our park. I know that some more people go there because of the cafe, but many people don't go there any longer because of the cafe, and they're the park users, and this is not satisfactory for that reason.
Thank you very much for keeping to time, and thank you for coming along. Thank you for your patience in waiting for us. Okay, do we have questions? Councillor Bax. Oh, sorry. No, we have the agent for the... Is he on? No? We haven't got one. Okay. Excuse me. And we'll take some questions then. Councillor Bass.
Sorry, this is a comment, not a question. I don't know if you want questions first or... okay. No, I just wanted to say that I think we should be protecting our locally listed park, and that the operation of the cafe should be secondary to that. I can think of numerous examples of other historic parks that have cafes in operation, but they're smaller and they perhaps don't have outdoor seating areas at all, you know, and outdoor operations perhaps take place through a serving hatch and that's it. So I think we must be protecting the open space, protect the thoroughfare, and protecting our historic park here. I think it's very important.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to make a comment about this, and I think we all, if I may suggest, understand this pretty well. And I think we're all quite familiar with this beautiful park. I mean, the principle here has to be that the park is what matters. It's why people go there is to go to the park. And I don't think anybody would suggest that it's not a good idea to have a nice cafe And I don't think any of us dislike sitting outside in the sunshine over a cappuccino and even a piece of cake. I mean, I don't think what this is about is that. What this is about is, can you justify more paving and natural surfaces in a designated open area and locally listed park? Is it justified? That's the key. In my view, it is not justified. I think, to coin a phrase, I'm minded to say enough and no more. In 2016, retrospective permission was granted for outdoor, alfresco dining. There was quite a lot of problems then because of the swamp cypress and the materials that we use. That's actually very upsetting. But I'm pleased to know that irrespective of what happens here, working now? Yes. I'm pleased to know that the cafe proprietors look as if they're going to be remedying that anyway. And I don't think that remedying that and protecting this magnificent tree should be the reason to grant this. It's not an enabling action. It's an essential action that should happen irrespective of what we do here. So what I would say is that what we have to look at is, first of all, the policy, which I think is very clear. I don't think this can be justified. It's against our policy. This is designated open space, and I do not believe that it is correct for this committee to go against a very, very well-written development management policy, very clear management policy, and grant something that will, in my view, do damage to the open space here. It's designated open space is one of the highest levels of protection we can give a park. It's one of the highest levels. And I am not satisfied that this is the right thing to do. And if I may, just to save a bit of time, I'd like to propose refusal. The proposal would fail to contribute positively to the setting and quality of the designated open space, and it has not been demonstrated that there are any wider benefits which would outweigh the loss of open space, contrary to policies DM1 and DM18 of the Development Management Policies Local Plan 2013. And please, Chairman, if I may just say this, there is no question that this is contrary to policy. It is a matter of opinion, but in my book, this can't be justified. I think we're just going to have to protect this park, and I do hope that members of the Planning Committee will see it that way and protect this park, because I think it would be, frankly, a very bad thing to do and establish the most unfortunate principle. No, we've got to protect our heritage. We can't afford to keep on doing these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to say that I'm happy to second the motion from Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Chair. I've got, before I comment, I've got a couple of questions maybe to ask. What is the current seating capacity with the existing area, and how much, I assume they're doubling the seating capacity, am I right? In terms of the area they're occupying now?
Sorry, you're asking about the area of the existing terrace?
That's right. How much what's the seating capacity and how much?
Perhaps if I could have the plans back up on the screen.
And while we're doing that, how much space is left to walk after the new extension up to the lake, please?
Yes, I can definitely show you that with the plan. Yeah. Okay, so just to review here, so here's the full extent of the park, and we are looking at an area right here. So just to go back to the photos to give you the visual, this is the existing terrace. From this angle, it looks like the existing terrace is smaller than this area, but it actually is a little bit bigger. If we go to the plans here, so this here shows the existing terrace. This is the proposed part, the extension to the terrace, which then comes up against the tarmac, which leads down to the path, which goes here. There is a pathway here, which is outside of the development. It's not changed or has nothing to do with the development. There is a pathway here, which again goes round, which the development does not interfere with in any way. So what we are looking at is just infilling this bit of area here, which does not form a pathway.
My first the question was how much space is left for people to walk in between the new development and the lake, which is sort of right on the border. Am I right?
Yeah. So all of the existing formal pathway, none of the existing formal pathway will be changed. It is only the grass, which people tend to walk across here, that would be built over, but the formal pathway will not be changed in any way.
Question to Marilyn, maybe in terms of what comment Marilyn has made. This is quite DM18 and DM1. What is your view in terms of refusing on that ground?
It is a balanced decision, and it will be for members to determine whether or not they wish to refuse it on those grounds. I think officers have concluded differently in the overall context, which I think Kimberly has set out in her presentation and set out in the report. It is a departure from the local plan, but there are reasons why officers believe that that can be accepted. Members are entitled to take a different view on that.
Because I do believe we need to protect our parks and obviously in terms of cafe and sitting area, I think we all like to sit down and have a bit, but then there's this limit up to which we can go into the park area to try and facilitate that. So, okay.
Councillor Ashton?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I mean, Councillor Perrett, we're having a bit of an agreement tonight. Obviously, this can't go on. You know, it's very important, this. And it is a matter of opinion, as Beverly has said. The reason for refusal that I've proposed is, I mean, obviously I'm going to say this, aren't I? But it is a sustainable reason. It's not a vexatious, just trying to be nice reason. It's a proper reason for refusal, because doing this is contrary to our adopted policy. What the officers have done, and they're entitled to do it, they're saying it's justified. They're saying, well, it's a nice thing to have or whatever, and it won't do any harm. I think it's massively harmful. I think it is. It's not about the pathway, it's about the openness, it's about the grassed area. It's about the fact that you can't keep nibbling away at designated open space. I mean, there is a terrace there, and that's established. It is what it is, but we don't have to add to it. So it's a choice that we have to make. And I've come to the conclusion, and I had to think about it very carefully. And I actually went down there and had a little walk round, and I'm absolutely sure this would be quite damaging to the designated open space. I know I really am, and I would be terribly upset. I think a lot of people would be terribly upset, not just people from Pinner, but people all over Harrow, if we try and diminish the relevance and the substantive protection that our policy gives us. If we start nibbling away at this, I really don't think it's a good idea. And there'll be other instances in other parks. They'll say, well, that park had it, and I don't honestly think it would be a good thing to do. So I do hope that this is refused tonight, because I feel quite, I was very impressed with, by the way, Mrs. Lindop's speech, because I can see how passionate she is. And she's absolutely right to be that way. And I wish more people cared about our heritage and our open spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions or?
Can I please just add?
I'm sorry, you can't. I'm really sorry, you can't now. I'm really sorry. So we'll vote first on the motion to refuse. So all those in, we're going to vote first of all on Councillor Ashton's proposal to refuse. So all those in favour of refusing. So that's unanimous. So the application falls.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
But we have to move on, but thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll move back to Dalston Gardens now. No speakers. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. To confirm, the site location for this item is 16 Dalston Gardens, Stanmore. Officers are requesting members to grant a first-storey rear extension to the existing two-storey warehouse at 16 Dalston Gardens and are subject to 6 conditions set out in Appendix 1 of the report. This application is being reported to committee as it includes over 400 square metre increase of industrial floor space, which is outside the scope of delegation. No objections have been received following public consultation. The site is located within Honeypot Lane Industrial Business Park, which is a strategic industrial location on the western side of Dalston Gardens. The top right image is the immediate street scene at the application site with the subject property highlighted by the red circle. The bottom right image shows the current flat roof form at the front of the site, with the main pitch roof form sitting behind and a secondary pitch roof further to the rear. The blue dots indicate warehouses with a larger footprint are higher or a box form as proposed in this application, putting into context this proposal. The ground floor footprint does not change, however the internal configurations are altered as part of the snack and food manufacturing operations that will commence when the first floor extension is complete. This does not require planning permission as it falls within the permitted use of the site. The first floor extension amounts to 470 square metres of additional floor space. There are no highway objections as the extension would create minimal additional trips to the site. Any additional noise created by the additional floor space is considered commensurate with the strategic industrial location. Importantly, there is no change to the front elevation, which means the bulk created by the proposal is within the height and width of the existing building within the street scene, and therefore would not impact on the character and appearance of the subject property and locality. The rear elevation changes clearly show the change of pitch roof to flat roof form. The side elevations also show that the proposed heights are within the current ridge height of the main roof. Based on the planning considerations I've highlighted and as confirmed on the slide, officers consider the proposal compliant with the relevant planning policies. This concludes the presentation and members should consider as officers' recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Nothing? Anybody? No? So shall we move straight to the vote then? Yes. Those in favour of the recommendation to approve planning permission subject to the conditions? Unanimous. Okay, thank you. So the decision is to approve planning subject to the conditions listed. If we move on to Park Drive, 2 Park Drive.
This application is in relation to an existing property shown before you now. You'll note that the size of the site is larger than the other sites, other properties within this street. The proposal before you is effectively to extend the existing property on the site and to effectively provide two houses where there is currently one house. You can see the front elevation, you can see the existing rear elevation where there are a range of extensions currently. You'll also note that this building, I'm aware from Kimri's presentation, you can't see what I'm doing with the cursor. I can see it, but you can't. But the existing, that the building to, let me go back, oops, going in the wrong direction. The existing building joining it has a really long building to the rear. There's flank walls of those are imperforate. You can see on the overhead, the long orange building is that extension that I just referred to. So you'll see here the existing elevations at the top and the proposed elevations. You'll notice there's a slight change in the ridge height of the side extension, but basically is in keeping with what's already been done, and the conversion of the garage and the frontage there, Councillor Perrick, as you asked in briefing, will match the existing frontage. And the rear elevation. The comments were noted. I hadn't realised that the slide had translated when you had said the side and rear elevation. And we do apologise for that. Generally, I can get that right. It wasn't you. It was a test to see who'd read the report. So the extensions in and of themselves are considered to comply with design guidance. The reason why that is relevant is in terms of the garden land policy, in terms of providing additional accommodation on what is effectively garden land. In and of itself, these extensions, were this to remain a dwelling house, would remain the same. Therefore, it is an exception to garden land policy. The houses themselves both meet London Plan standards and provide a good quality of accommodation. One parking space is provided for effectively the new house. Highways are satisfied that that is appropriate in this area. It's a PTAL 4 and that the existing on-street parking situation, it would not be exacerbated by this. There's a little bit of a block plan showing how the parking works. And the 3D rendering of the frontage, which shows the materials to match. So it will have an acceptable impact on the amenity of neighbours. It does comply with policies and provides two houses on this site, which is slightly bigger than average on this area. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Beverly. Any questions? Yeah, comment there.
Yes, I don't think we're going to be in the Guinness Book of Records for this one. I shall be very brief. I think this is completely acceptable and see no reason to refuse it. Thank you.
Any further comments? Oh, Councillor Back.
Yeah, Chair, it's not actually related to this, but just on the point about the cursor, I don't know how hard it would be for IT to have like a different colour on the cursor so it would appear on the screens when we're looking, because on that one it was fairly easy to follow, but on the previous one it was slightly more difficult. If it's a very black and white or faded plan, and then to understand which bit the officer's referring to, it's not all that easy.
I will pick that up with IT. I'm sure that they'll have noted the comments. It wasn't apparent when we met last time, so we'll see what can be done. Failing that, we could use the old-fashioned pointer. I think we've still got some of those old laser pointers and use the screens up there, so we can find a way around it.
Thank you. If no other questions or comments, should we just move to the vote? So all those in favour of the recommendation? Okay, it's unanimous. Agreed. Planning permission as set out in the papers. Okay, shall we move on to the next one? Which is Roger Bannister, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Officers are requesting members to grant 49 additional parking spaces within the Roger Bannister Sports Centre, subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1 of the report and the addendum provided. This application is being reported to Planning Committee at the request of members following the previous applications on the site to ensure appropriate parking on the site overall. 2 objections were received on this application. These related mainly to the proposed tarmacking, but the ground treatment has now changed to a more permeable solution. There was also concerns relating to the lack of marked parking bays and lack of gating of the area. It is considered that maintaining the openness of the green belt is more important. The application site is located west of the running track within the wider existing sports centre and directly north of Uxbridge Road. The yellow arrow on the aerial image indicates a vehicle access route. The site is located in the green belt. Much of the application site currently includes a temporary hard standing access for the construction of the wider recreational upgrades to the centre. The photo on the top left shows a vehicle access route into the southern boundary of the site. All other photos relate to the current construction activities ongoing at the site. As confirmed, 49 spaces is accommodated within the site. No boundary treatment is proposed as it will be an open area when not in use. All trees within or close to the boundary will be retained. An arboricultural method statement and tree protection condition will be attached to any permission given. The amended ground treatment for the car park is proposed as bob pave, which will allow for soil and the reseeding of grass, which will minimise the impact visually on the ground. The image is a breakdown of how it would be installed. Bob pave has a lifespan of 20 years. The addendum for this item has added a compliance condition to ensure the bob pave is maintained throughout the lifetime of the development. Given that the grass will be able to regrow when within the bob pave being permeable and sympathetic, officers considered there would be minimal visual impact on the openness of the green belt. The addendum also removes condition 5 that requires a car park management plan, as these details have already been approved in a larger application on the site. These details confirm approximately 37 large events will occur per year. Therefore, the frequency of cars in this location will be limited. On event days, parking stewards are proposed to manage vehicles entering and exiting the site. The highways officer supported the provision of the overspill car park. Furthermore, this area would support the overall parking provision of the wider recreational facilities granted on the site. These types of facilities are considered an exception to development within the green belt as per paragraph 145 of the PPF. Therefore, officers consider the proposal would not have a materially harmful impact on the openness of the green belt, the character and appearance of the area, and it would not create any harmful impacts regarding ecology, drainage or landscaping. Based on the planning considerations highlighted, officers consider the proposal compliant with the relevant planning policies. This concludes the presentation and members should consider officers' recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perrett?
Thank you for the presentation. Just one comment on the addendum on Port Pavey. Can you please explain a little bit more about the paragraph you put in on approved plan and documents on page 11 of the addendum? And how long would this surface would last? And what about the maintenance of the surface to the same standard?
In terms of the duration, it's 20 years. Relating to the discussion within the briefing that we had, just following on from members' feedback, that the compliance condition just ensures that it goes beyond those 20 years, so that if it does deteriorate, there is an obligation in terms of the planning condition that continues it through the lifetime of the development.
Councillor Baxter, and then.
Yes, sorry, it was the same point actually. I asked the Conservative briefing on or last week about the lifespan of bob pave, so I just wanted to thank officers for confirming that.
Councillor Ashton?
Yes, I mean, I can understand why there are a couple of objections. I think that residents are a little weary of the time it's taken to construct all the different offers on what is a good sports facility. And I know that they were very upset about the dinosaur Diplodocus, chops thing, that is completely wrong. But, we are where we are. Whether it will ever happen is another matter. But certainly with this, I can understand why they're a little bit exercised about the longevity of this service and how durable it is. You know, unless I've misunderstood the addendum, it looks to me as if you've made it pretty clear that this has got to be enduring, that if it, you know, deteriorates or anything goes wrong, it's got to be, you know, remedied, and that it will serve for a long time as a reasonable compromise to parking in the green belt. So I think, you know, unless I've misunderstood, I mean, it's a kind of questiony comment. I mean, you know, that it's pretty watertight now that we're securing this surface as being bod pave, the real accredited thing.
Yeah, so the condition actually refers to bod pave and the proposed site location plan. So yeah, it's all referred to and kind of firms it up in terms of referring to the drawings that have been submitted.
Yes, well, that's good. I mean, just as an aside, I don't think, and I hate to say it, but I actually don't think there is going to be enough parking when it actually comes to event days, but at least there's some. And as I say, I do sympathise and understand, you know, the local residents. They haven't really been best pleased, particularly with the construction phase. You know, this is limited to a certain number of events a year. And obviously we're going to keep an eye on that because it's our site. So we're going to be responsible. But I'm satisfied that this surface is in keeping with the character of the green belt. So I think it's a good thing that we've got away from, you know, putting a tarmac surface down. So I'm quite happy with it. Thank you.
Thank you. No other questions? Should we move to the vote then on this? Okay. So proposal is to grant planning permission. So all those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. Planning approval is granted, subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1. So we move on now to 6 New Road, Harrow.
Thank you, Chair. 6 New Road, item 207, relate. A bungalow on a private road which is located off Greenford Road in the ward of Harrow on the Hill. The photos on the slide at the moment just shows the existing site circumstances. In particular, it is noted that there is a very mixed character in terms of the building form and development of New Road itself. The application which was approved in 2019 for the redevelopment of this site to provide 3 two-storey terrace dwellings on this development site. The slide on the left shows the layout of this extant permission in terms of the footprint, showing the 3 houses, and in comparison there is a proposed site plan showing a very similar footprint of layout in terms of the shape of the development. However, the proposal before the committee this evening is for 7 flats rather than 3 houses. The slides have been updated ever so slightly since briefing, so I'll just take you through them. So the approved front elevation of the proposal is on the left, which is for the 3 houses, and the proposed application before you this evening is on the right. As you will note, on the approved document, there was an element which was projecting forward into the street scene, and likewise that's the same here. However, the roof is slightly taller in this section to permit habitable roof space for the flats which are proposed. There are some changes to the fenestration details as well. So you have 4 front doors, for example, and a slight change in this sort of fenestration of the windows. For example, there are 4 windows proposed here at first floor level compared to 3 proposed here. At the rear, for the 3 houses, you had 3 houses individual with 2 with dormer windows. The proposal this evening is slightly different in design, owing to the internal layouts of the development being 7 flats, including some terraced areas at first floor level. The slides here just show the existing approved application in side elevation compared to the proposed side elevation, which is before you this evening. We have received no objections to the consultation exercise that we undertook as part of this planning application. The flats meet the space standards of the London of the London plan. One point of clarification regarding the refuse storage at the rear, following briefing, is that the slides has been updated, which is before you. The report at paragraph 6.3.9 refers to the refuse and cycle storage being located at the rear of the site, and that is correct. There's a bin store in this location and a cycle store in this location. However, the submitted details don't show enough bins, so there is a recommendation for a condition which would require some further details regarding that, but we are satisfied that there is more than sufficient space within the confines of the site to be able to accommodate the bin storage that would be required, which is 7 bins for each unit for the refuse and recycling. In terms of the principle of the development, that is an accepted principle. There is an extant permission on the site to redevelop the site. The proposal is considered to be in accordance with the character and appearance of the area. We are satisfied that there would not be an unacceptable impact on residential amenity. As I've mentioned, the standard of residential accommodation meets the London Plan standards. The site is in a PTAL location 3, and there are 4 parking spaces for 7 flats. The Highways Authority have raised no objections to that provision and are satisfied that the proposal would be satisfactory in that respect. We have received no objections from neighbouring Brent Council relating to biodiversity, or nor did they request such conditions for the extant scheme. We have attached a condition regarding fire safety, and there are no adverse impacts on development and flood risk. We have recommended the application subject to a number of planning conditions as set out in the report, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Orla. Nit?
Thank you, Ola, for that. So slight concern about the parking space. We're seeing there are 4 parking available at the moment. But if I look at the comments by landscaping and trees on 6.3.6, it says number of parking spaces could be reduced to provide more soft landscaping to the front of the building. I mean, we discussed situation of flooding in the earlier case, and obviously it would be better if there were some permeable landscaping in the front of the house, but that would reduce the number of parking. So what's your comment then? Why we're not following the advice from landscaping and tree, what do you advise here from them?
Thank you. As always, there's a balance to be met when we're reviewing planning applications, and in this instance, it's a balance against landscaping versus the number of car parking spaces. And that is what's proposed here. It's a very similar layout in that respect. The comments are that a parking space could be removed, but then that might introduce an objection on parking grounds. So it's a balance, as I've mentioned. The plans with regards to the landscaping are illustrative at the moment, so they show a broad example of how landscaping could be accommodated on the site, but there is a condition which would tighten that up. So we have recommended it subject to a condition requiring further information for the details of the hardened off landscaping in terms of the specifications and the materials. And it's suffice it to say we would be requiring permeable materials to avoid sort of surface runoff, etc., onto the adjacent private road. So, subject to that condition, that's the reason. That's one of the reasons why we've recommended it for approval in that respect.
Any other? Yep. Councillor Ashton.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the PTAL score of 3, which is medium, isn't it? I suppose we ought to be grateful there are 4 parking spaces the way things are nowadays. So, I mean, it'll be workable. And as I don't think we could have less. I think we need that. It's not that well connected. And you know what? It's a perfectly reasonable development. You know, the road is an unadopted road with all different types of housing there. So I think this is perfectly acceptable. I don't think that anyone would object to it, and nobody has, but I can't imagine why they would. So I'm really quite satisfied with it. And
to grant planning permission subject to the conditions set out. So all those in agreement? So the decision is to grant planning permission, unanimous decision. So we'll move on, I think, to the final one, are we? The old school, Church Hill.
I hope to be quite brief on this. I think Lucy gave quite a thorough briefing to both groups. So the application is in relation to a Grade 1 listed building within the school site, and involves several works to the interior of the building to facilitate the ongoing use and its use as teaching. It is Grade 1 listed. It is the highest standard of listing. English Heritage, Historic England, I'll learn that, Historic England have given us the clear to determine the application for ourselves. It ensures the long-term use of the building, and it is recommended for approval, and I'll leave it at that. If anyone's got any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you. Any questions? Anybody? Marilyn?
just that it was a very interesting presentation at the briefing, and I'm really pleased you didn't go through it all again. But it really was fascinating how much detail and work has to go into this kind of massively historic building and the alterations. But I think it's really a job well done by our conservation officer, actually working with the school. And I think it's going to be fine, you know, sensitive and fine, and the right way to do things. And actually of great interest, really. That's if you like that sort of thing. Thank you.
If we move to the vote then, so the recommendation is to agree approval, grant listed building consent. So all those in agreement? Thank you, that's unanimous. So the recommendation is approved. Okay, we have no other business, and so that's the end of the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to officers, as usual, for very helpful presentations. And we shall be back again in July for the last one before the end of the summer break. Thanks very much, everybody.